Hello, everybody, and welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for MoviesWithMark.com, FilmInquiry.com, Twin Cities, Geek.com, and PopThrill.com. Actually remembered one of the other places that I write for. Occasionally, I'm all over the map. Okay, so, hey Hannibal Grimm, how you doing? Good to see you in the chat there. Alright, so, it's summer movie season, and there's a lot to cover. In fact, I doubt I'm going to be able to cover all the big films coming out. So I'm gonna try to do my best though. We're gonna cover the top films on this stream though. There's a lot of other little ones that I'm trying to get around to watching, but we'll just start from the top. It's that time of the year where we're just gonna get the bigger and bigger movies, and there's been a lot that's been crowding up. So let's just get right to them. So on today's stream, we're of course going to be reviewing the top film from last weekend, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the sequel to 2018's Into the Spider-Verse. We'll also be taking a look at Transformers: Rise of the Beast, the I guess technically the sixth or seventh Transformers. If you count Bumblebee, it's the seventh Transformers live action film, which has a different director, a different tone, different setting, and it's got my boys, the Beast Wars, in it. So, of course, by Beast Wars, of course, me Maximals. I don't want to piss off the Transformers fans. So we'll talk about that. There's some interesting stuff to talk about there. And then, of course, we got to talk about the latest DC Comics film of The Flash, which will be coming out next weekend. So, kind of all over the map. It's like I'm covering a film that came out last weekend, Across the Spider-Verse, a film that's coming out this weekend, Rise of the Beasts, and a film that's coming out next weekend of The Flash. So, a lot of ground to cover here. Yeah, I know, Hannibal. It's that time of the it's that time of the year where it's like, before award season kicks in, we get like the big summer movies that just kind of like drown out the theaters. And there's been like I know there's not as many big films. Like there are a few that are going head to head. Like next week the Flash is going head to head with Elemental. And of course, the Barbie movie is going to be competing with Oppenheimer. So there's going to be some big battles this summer. But yeah, like there's just usually a few big ones that you got to cover, and there's no avoiding them. I usually like to cover small films as well, mix it up in there, but there just wasn't a lot of time for that. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of small films that I want to cover. I'm going to try to cover The Blackening on the next stream, just because I really want to see that one. And there's been multiple screenings for it. I haven't gotten to one. I'm going to get to it, though. So. Oh, you're not big on Transformers? Yeah. It's weird because, like, I've never been that big into Transformers, but I've been big into Beast Wars. So, this is like getting closer to the stuff I know about Transformers. So there's some stuff said. Okay, so before we get into the reviews, obviously, if usually I do like the streaming recommendations, but I don't have any big ones this week. I guess I usually prepare a title card, but since I didn't have one, I'll just do one off the bat. There's a film over on Max, HBO Max. I guess I just call it HBO Max, so that's confusing. But there's a great film over there called Reality, which is a dramatization of a 2017 whistleblower who leaked info from who leaked info about like Russian collusion in the elections, and she was cornered in her home, and it was recorded by the FBI. It was adapted into a stage play, and it makes for a great, tense, like kind of like bottle drama. So that's like kind of like one of my big recommendations. I was gonna cover a few others, but there's like so much more I'm trying to cover on like I'm trying to find a good film to recommend on Shudder. There's some good films I've been watching on Shudder, but not great ones. So trying to find one. Yeah, really hoping that I'm big on coherent writing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, and the Transformers movies are always messy. So, in fact, why don't we just, since that's like foremost on our minds right now, let's just get to it. Let's get right to the top film that everyone's seeing this weekend. We'll jump right into it with Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. Let me get my notes up here, just because there's a fairly big cast. Not as big as other Transformers movies, and I guess like that's kind of the best way to say it. It's like this film is not as big as the Bayformers, but we'll let you know. So let me get my notes up here. And all right, get a little hydration. All right. And in 3, 2, 1, 1.5, 1.25, 0. So Transformers: Rise of the Beasts is the 7th live-action Transformers film, if you count Bumblebee, and I think you might have to at this point, because the way that it looks like the Transformers universe is going now, in terms of like the live-action films that merge like CGI, it looks like they're trying to go backwards and try to kind of like undo the damage that was done by Michael Bay's Transformers movies. And it's mostly because like the last Transformers film we saw was Bumblebee, which took place in the 1980s. It was a smaller story. I think that's probably what I love the most about Bumblebee, is that it didn't have a lot of the junk. It wasn't It didn't have the things that you usually see in, Michael Bay Transformers movies where they're all over the place. It's a world-saving plot. There's too many robots and human characters squawking about the screen, and the screenplay is incomprehensible, and the editing is all over the place. So Bumblebee, it wasn't great, but I felt like that's about as good as the live-action Transformers films are going to get. So I was a little bit interested in Rise of the Beast because it does carry the Transformers name, but this is somewhat similar to Bumblebee, but also it's weird. It's kind of like a combination of both the simplicity and the bigger heart of Bumblebee and the standard blockbuster staging that Michael Bay's Transformers were kind of always known for. And the reason I say that is because this is a film that takes place in 1994, so you've got, the same deal as Bumblebee. You've got the dated references, and you've got a different setting, and, of course, like, they're setting it up this way so that it makes sense that the Transformers could be more in hiding, so that when they come up, it's, it's like a big surprise and shock. But then, it's funny because, like, you have, like, this great opportunity to do something different, set it during a different time frame, and ultimately the plot that we get here is just kind of like a standard. It feels like it's the same plotting as like the Michael Bay Transformers films, where they have to stop another, evil robot from destroying the world with an ancient Cybertronian relic that they once again find on Earth, and once again is going to destroy it if they once again don't do battle with it. So they're once again going through the motions. So the story this time is that the giant robot I'm trying to think. I think it's like a Terracon or something. My Transformers lore is a bit off here, but basically there's a giant orb robot that's running around eating planets, and it needs like this kind of like transwarp key in order to get to certain planets to start scarfing down on them. So this relic was buried on Earth. And the Maximals, which are basically the animal versions of the Autobots, which some people might remember from like the Beast Wars cartoons, they've tried to protect this relic and make sure that it's never used by Unicron and that no one ever discovers it. So of course, of course someone does discover it, and we get like the standard, globe-trotting, treasure hunting adventure with the humans, and then the big battle to stop Unicron by the end. Now, here's where the film gets a little bit more interesting. It's more interesting for how it stages the characters. Like, for starters, the human characters, for me, are usually, like, the most annoying part of the Transformers films because they're always manic, they're always all over the place, they make incomprehensible decisions, they have the weirdest ideas in their head, and, like, I could go down the list, like, there's a weirdo who wants to date younger girls and has, like, a laminated copy of Juliet's Law. There's Mark Wahlberg who like just randomly drinks beer during a car crash for some reason. There's Shia LaBeouf running around and scribbling on walls and just freaking out the whole time. And it feels like most of the time the humans are just present to, scream the names of Autobots as they go into battle. And thankfully, we don't quite have that here. Like the central characters are Noah Diaz, played by Anthony Ramos, who you might remember. I'm pretty sure he was like in The Heights, wasn't he? I'm pretty sure he was. But he does a great job playing Noah as kind of like this 20-something-year-old who, he used to serve in the military, but he doesn't anymore. He's a whiz with electronics, but he can't find a decent job because of like the way that like corporations are set up to not recognize people like him who are down on his luck. His brother is sick and ailing, and they can't pay for his healthcare bills. And Noah just keeps on chugging. He just keeps like, tomorrow's another day. I'll find a way to make some money. I'm going to find a way to make this happen. So you like Noah, and you root for him. And you also root for Elena Wallace, played by Dominique Fishback, who is kind of like a hapless museum intern who does a lot of great research into ancient artifacts and technologies, and she's not recognized for it. So, of course, when she just makes this big discovery of like Cybertronian tech that's been on Earth for centuries, nobody will believe her, so she's going to have to team up with the Autobots, and essentially teams up with Noah for their big adventure. So they're likable. They're likable. They have a good friendship. They have a decent chemistry. Like, Noah never trips over himself trying to force a romance here, and And Elena is never used as eye candy. I kind of like the fact that they made Elena be prone to panic attacks and she tries to like calm herself down during all like the chaos and carnage of giant robots, and that her calming technique actually works for herself. Like it doesn't feel like in a lesser film, much lesser film. This is a film that would have kind of like either made fun of Elena for having panic attacks, or she would have had to been reliant on Noah for that. And she doesn't. And like there's a decent back and forth between Noah and Elena. So then we get to the Autobots, and the good robots transforming robots who are trying to save Earth. And I'll just skip to like the only one that has a decent personality, and that's Mirage, who's voiced by Pete Davidson. And I'm glad that they gave him the most screen time and the most like character and personality. Because like for one, Mirage is the coolest Autobot. He has the ability to make multiple holograms of himself, which comes in handy for escaping from police when he's in car form, or trying to attack like the giant enemy that he's trying to defeat, making multiple copies of himself. And Mirage is just like he has like a great little like buddy thing going on with Noah. He's got he's lived on Earth long enough where he's gotten used to the customs, and he can like poke fun, and he can talk about current events in a very relatable way. So, and it's like it's weird because like usually the Autobots are mostly just they stand around, they maybe cite some pop culture, and then everything else is just all business with them. It's all like where did this come from, how do we get back to Cybertron, how do we defeat these robots, the same thing over and over. And I say that because outside of Mirage, not much of the Autobot Transformers have much of a personality. Like Optimus Prime has an okay arc, but it's not really expanded upon. Like Optimus feels terrible that that his Autobot brethren have been stranded on Earth. He feels responsible, and he wants to make the tough call of using this relic to get back to Cybertron. The problem is the transwarp key, or whatever it's called. Unicron could use it to destroy the Earth, but Autobots could use it to get back home. And the humans, knowing this, are more compelled to destroy the relic to make sure that nobody can use it and that Earth is, spared all this carnage. So there's an interesting dynamic there, but it doesn't really play out. Like, it's going to sound so cliche that I say this about Transformers film, but this whole arc about deciding what to do with the relic is very mechanical. That's the best way to describe it, because like it ultimately leads up to Noah and Optimus like recognizing each other, going like, oh, we're not so different, you and I, with standard expository dialogue. So we get a lot of like the same exposition dumping from Peter Cullen voicing Optimus Prime. I will say this though, I like that this film is much more earnest in what it's trying to do. Like Noah and Elena are much more likable, but but one of the things I love about Optimus is that they don't try to set him up as kind of like this noble warrior who's like, who will say stuff like, always fight with honor. And then he stabs an enemy in the back, or rips out their guts, or shoots them in the face when they're down. It's just like, I'm getting mixed messages here, Optimus. There's nothing like that in Rise of the Beast. In fact, this film knows what it's trying to do so much that they have a scene where Optimus addresses Unicron's henchman Scourge, voiced by Peter Dinklage. And Scourge is a villain who doesn't really have much personality. Like, his only personality is that he works for Unicron, he kills a lot of robots, and every time he kills them, he places their insignia on his chassis or whatever. So Scourge is just like your standard villain who Optimus has to defeat, and every time Optimus addresses Scourge, he doesn't say something like, oh, you don't fight with honor, like we are noble heroes. He just says, I'm gonna rip off your head. I hate you so much that I'm gonna rip off your head, and the spine's gonna come out, and it's gonna be all gross. And sure enough, that's exactly what Optimus does. And more or less because that's what we've come to expect from the Michael Bay Transformers films, is that Optimus will always make some brutal kill at the end here. And there's no like veneer of nobility and protecting humans and all that. It's just, Optimus protecting his people. Like, he barely even cares about humans in this film. And he definitely doesn't care about other Transformers like Scourge. He wants to rip his head off, and he does that. So yeah, like, the villains are all generic. Like, they all, there's a few other like Terracons that serve Unicron, but they're all generic. They don't have personalities here. As for the Maximals, who apparently have been on Earth this whole time, and they've been guarding the relic. Apparently they've been on Earth much longer than the Autobots, which kind of, if you're familiar with the Beast Wars cartoon, it kind of tracks, because the Beast Wars arrived much earlier before the Autobots. So sorry, I'm geeking out a little bit here. Basically, the Maximals, the animal version of the Autobots, have been here longer. So you'd think they'd have a little bit more insight into human culture, and they do here and there. But like, in terms of like personality, it's not really there, and it kind of saddens me, because like, for one, you've got Ron Perlman voicing Optimus Primal, which is a great choice. And there are some decent scenes for him. Like, he's very committed to what I'm assuming at this point is like a second in command, which is Airazor, voiced by Michelle Yeoh, in a decent role. I don't know. It kind of feels a little bit thankless for what she's given to do, but there is a very like kind of like somber moment where Optimus has to make a tough call about deciding to kill one of his comrades who's infected, and he realizes he can't save him, and has to make the tough call about, taking them out. And like, I was so frustrated with that scene, because like, this scene feels sad, and I should be feeling something for it, especially since, I mean, I never grew up with the Transformers cartoons, because that was like before my time, but I did grow up with Beast Wars, and what I love so much about Beast Wars is that you spent enough time with these characters that when you did get to the moments when they did die, like, it wasn't just like sudden, like in the 80s Transformers film, like, it actually hit you hard, and there were like very somber moments that actually tugged at your heartstrings. But within this film that's been like trimmed to like a decent like 2 hours, we don't really get to know much about the Maximals. They don't have a lot of personality, so that when we get to these moments that should hit hard, like, we should feel something in these scenes, I just didn't. Like, it's like, I'm familiar with Optimus Primal, and I'm familiar with Airazor, and like the history of like, like the cartoon, and like the somber realization about, when this character is gonna die. But I just felt nothing for it. And it's like, the film's trying to make this scene dramatic, and it's trying to make you care about these characters. But the problem is, much like a lot of the Autobots, they don't give them much personality. Especially, and it's really sad too, because the designs of these Transformers are actually much better than Bay's designs. Like, they're much more recognizable. They don't feel like junkyard explosions on the screen. In particular, I really love the designs of RC and Wheeljack. Like, they made a few changes to them here and there, but in terms of like their overall design, they kind of nailed it to making them very recognizable. They have very distinct, recognizable colors to make them very distinct from everyone. Which you kind of have to. I mean, like, RC, is meant to be like, like the female Autobot, so she has like the very bright reds, and Wheeljack is kind of meant to be like a little bit of like an older Volkswagen model, so he's got a little bit of that kind of like a tan color, I guess you want to call it that. And they don't have much personality, and it's like, they have scenes that are set up where they could have personality, where they could establish themselves better, and then they don't really pay off. Like, the most we ever get out of Wheeljack is that we learn that because Wheeljack has been in Peru, he's kind of gained a Latino accent, and it's interesting, because you would think that, like, Wheeljack, having spent more time around the people and being more logical, there would be at least some, like some funny nerdy stuff he could say here and there, but he just kind of blends into the background with like a lot of the other, supplemental Autobots and Terracons that crowd the screen here. In particular, I was kind of disappointed with how they handled the other Maximals of Rhinox and Cheetor. Like, Cheetor doesn't really do much of anything. Like, he has a few lines, and honestly, I know he has a voice actor, but I honestly can't remember anything that Rhinox said in this film. Like, nothing. Like, Cheetor and Rhinox are basically just there to fill the background for, like, when we get to the big sequence where they have to save the world and stop this giant structure that's gonna, obliterate the world, and they gotta blow it up. So it's just more bodies to fill the screen. I'm almost kind of thankful at that point that they didn't have more Maximals, that we didn't see more of them. Like, we got a few, like, other Terracons we get to see here and there, but yeah, most of the Transformers are sadly just there to fill the background, which is sad when you look at like a film like Bumblebee, which had a very like the smallest amount of like Autobots and Decepticons present, that you just like wish, like, what's even the point of having Cheetor and Rhinox here? Or Wheeljack, we just gonna be just doing the standard exposition stuff. Like, it's just more bodies to fill the screen here. So in terms of like trying to find something to praise about this film, like, the best thing I can say about this film is that it does not have the same problems as Michael Bay's other Transformers movies. There's no clunky camera work during the battle sequences. They're fairly smooth, and that's mostly because a combination of both the bigger stability of like the camera, and of course relying on CGI heavy scenes where in those sequences you pretty much have to like make the camera steady when you slide through them. Like, a lot of people have been posting this online, but there's that scene during the climax in which we go under the structure, we see Optimus Primal swinging around, we see RC riding Rhinox, and then she jumps off him and she fires on more of these like Terracon invaders that are coming. And it's smooth. The camera work is smooth. You never get lost in anything. You can always tell which Autobot is on screen and which Terracon is on screen at all times. Even the more chaotic sequences, like there's a battle at there's a battle at a museum in New York, and there's a car chase in Peru, and they're all well assembled. They look good. They look good. There's some decent moments of action and carnage that you never feel like you're just seeing a mess of visual effects on the screen. They're comprehensible, is what I'm trying to say. You also don't have any awkward character moments. Like, the most awkward moment in the whole film is just when Noah tries to speak Spanish to Wheeljack and like tries to pretend that Wheeljack is actually a Latino, except like Noah kind of realizes, like, oh wait, you're a robot, so like maybe I shouldn't assume you're Latino. And there's like a little bit of like an awkward moment where Noah questions if he's a little bit racist. And that's like, in terms of like, because like Michael Bay's films always like stumble around themselves with like racism and sexism, and thankfully that's the only awkward moment here. And it's just like it passes by like that, and it's like, and compared to like how Bay stumbled through his films, it's not that bad. It's like, it's one line, and like they stumble around it, and then they move on and make the characters more grounded, more comprehensible, and give you a reason to care about them. That being said, this is a film that it works on paper. Like, we're given reasons to care about like Mirage, and we're given reasons to care about like Noah and Elena, and the plight of Optimus, and the plight of Optimus Primal is all there on paper, but it doesn't feel like there's enough like down moments to better get to know these characters and to like them more, which is so frustrating, because like it's not like Michael Bay's Transformers films where it's like, like you can't expect it out of the film, because like it's right there. It's like it's down that tunnel, you can see it, it's right in front of you. It's like, all I need is like a few more scenes to get me used to these characters. Because like, I'll admit, there were some scenes with Optimus Prime where he actually has some dry wit. Like, there's a great moment where like you have Bumblebee in the film, and Bumblebee does the thing he usually does, which is like, he doesn't really speak. He just talks in like sound bites that he takes from pop culture. And Optimus Prime has the best response to this, which is just like, I don't want you going to that drive-in movie theater anymore. It's a bad influence on you. And like, for that character who's usually just there to just like, stand tall and proud and like bear all the weight of the Autobots, it was nice to have that kind of like a quip like that. Like that's a perfect line for Optimus. That's a really good moment of comedy. And it's like, I want more scenes like that. This is a film where it's got all the good ingredients and it needs to cook with them more, because they're not quite there. Like, you can see the dynamic between Mirage and Noah, and it's good, but you don't get enough of it where, like, where you feel like the weight of their relationship when the big battle goes down. There's a concern within Optimus Prime about preserving his people that connects with Optimus Primal so that the Autobots and Maximals can come together. And it's just not there. Like, they try for it, but ultimately it like a lot of these scenes are just resolved too quickly, and it's just like it feels like they just throw in like a very cliche speech just to tie everything together here and make it like neat and tidy so that they can move on to the next scene where they have the next battle and the next fight and the next treasure solving aspect of this story. And it's such a surreal experience because like this plot is something you would expect out of a Michael Bay film because it's using Unicron, and it's using a bunch of like, Autobots and Terracons and Maximals that don't have that much personality. But it's not like, for lack of a better term, like it's not cringe where like, it's just like, they're manically trying to find fun stuff or weird stuff to do to make the film more exciting and compelling. And that's and it's a bit admirable that they're trying to make, this Transformers film more grounded. And on that level, it kind of works as a decent blockbuster. But the problem is you can see the potential there where it doesn't have to be on this level. It can go further. I feel like with like another 20 minutes tacked on, you would actually feel something more for Optimus Prime and Noah and like the plight of the planet and the decision of what to do with this relic, if there were some more down moments that you got to know these characters, you got to care about them, so that every scene just didn't feel like it was just, I hate to use this term again, but mechanical. It feels like a decent machine. Like if Michael Bay's Transformers films were like jalopies, this film is like a functional machine. And that's the best way I can describe it. Like, it's not a great film. It's not even a good film. It's a functional film. So like, as a summer blockbuster, it's not bad. Like, there's never a moment where like you're burying your head in your hands. You're just like, oh my God, why did they decide to go with this? Like, you can clearly see the intent here, and that there was that there was a clear motive about what they were trying to do here, and a decent staging for a lot of these action sequences and visual effects, and very competent visual effects, mind you. It's an okay blockbuster. So I would say that, if you are a big Transformers fan, you're probably going to like this film. I mean, I don't know. I was a Beast Wars fan, and I was a little bit, just a bit offended that they did my crew dirty. Like, I grew up with Beast Wars. I loved the hell out of that cartoon. And you just shoved Cheetor and Rhinox into the background, and you don't really spend that much time with Optimus Primal, especially when you give him much more pathos and you don't explore it in this film. It's so frustrating on that level. So I guess that's the best way to describe Transformers Rise of the Beast. It's like, it's a sufficient blockbuster if you are a big Transformers fan and you've been very like excusatory of Michael Bay's Bayisms. You're probably going to like this film a lot more because it feels closer to your average summer blockbuster. But knowing that there's a much more competent hand steering this vehicle, it just frustrated me to know that, this is an okay film and it could be so much better. It could be great. You can see it. There's ingredients here. They just need to cook it more. So ultimately what I ended up with was just a frustratingly average summer blockbuster. which is weirdly sad because this might be the best Transformers movie, which is both like which could be looked at as praise, but also just that this is a film not living up to its full potential. So yeah, that's Transformers: Rise of the Beast, currently playing in theaters this weekend. Sorry, I didn't look at the chat. I was going off here. Let me catch up here. All right, so let's see what Hannibal's talking about here. The problem is, this is part 7. Dude, Cybertron's gone. Welcome to Earth. It's weird because like it does play into Bumblebee. It's weird. Like it feels like we're in like we're getting what essentially is like the prequel series. Because you go with like if you look at like Bumblebee and this film with Rise of the Beast, they're on a completely different level of compared to like Michael Bay's films. In fact, I think I actually said that during my review of Bumblebee, which is like, okay, this is not in the same realm of Michael Bay. So when I say this film is not great, you have to recognize that level. When I say it's not great, I'm not saying it's not great compared to the Michael Bay Transformers films. Obviously, Bumblebee is great comparatively, but in terms of like a functional blockbuster, it's like it's average. And I feel the same way about Rise of the Beast. Like all the potential's there. I like the characters, but we don't spend enough time with them. Sadly. It's one of those things. Just like, you know, like Michael Bay's Transformers films, like even like The Last Night, which I think had the least involvement from him, I was just kind of yeah, whatever. They're all dumb. This film didn't work either. But then I get to Rise of the Beast, like it's so close. It's getting there. It's so close to making me care about these Transformers movies. So yeah. Let's see. He's the Silver Surfer. Unicron's basically Galactus. We've been bamboozled. This was the Fantastic Four. You know, yeah, technically they could call it that. Yeah, given the track record of the Fantastic Four movies. Yeah. I'd count this. Like what? Like look, you have Noah, you have Elena, you have Optimus Prime, and you have Optimus Primal. That's 4. We can count it as a Fantastic Four because that's really what it is. They got to stop Earth from being eaten, you know. Yeah, definitely not enough Maximals. In fact, I'm so glad I had my DVDs turned to this here because I got oh no, don't make my Superman thing fall out. There we go. I got my giant robot stack here of the Transformers stuff. So yeah, just so that you believe there's proof. I have the original release of Season 1 Beast Wars from Rhino Animation, and then the Seasons 2 and 3 that was put out by Shout Factory. So, I've been a Beast Wars fan. I grew up watching it when it was in syndication on the... like, it's weird because like when you talk about when you saw it in syndication, it's always different for everyone around the country. But in Minnesota, I believe we watched it on UPN on what was called like the action block. So basically like the action block is and this is, you know, this is probably going to sound like weird for anyone who's under the age of 30, but the action block was basically like every weekday morning you would get like a different cartoon depending on the day of the week. So I think it was like, and I'm pretty sure I might be off here, but I remember like Tuesdays and Thursdays you would get Beast Wars, and then in between there you would get like stuff like like G.I. Joe Extreme and Ghostbusters Extreme, which are actually like, as strange as those titles sounds, those are actually like really good shows. But yeah, like Beast Wars and like Beast Wars, I think like Reboot was actually sandwiched in there at one point, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, I thought I'd like show off my little Rhino Beast Wars case, just because this is the like you can get Beast Wars through like Shout Factory. This I think is the most current one that they got, but the Rhino Animation one is like Rhinomation was a weird company. Like they some of their DVDs were not that good, and I don't think this one has some okay special features, not a lot, but it has some cool cover art. Like, look at that. Look at that. You got Rhinox, you got Optimus Prime there. Got all the discs coming out. Oh my god. That's beautiful. Oh wait, it goes further. I forgot. It goes further like that. They don't make them like they used to. Because I much love these kind of like cool fold out stuff as opposed to just, slamming all the discs together like that. So, hey, Doc Robotnik, how you doing? Oh, and also, like, yes, I'm a little bit of a... like I said, I'm not that big into the original Transformers. I was never big into that cartoon, but I dig Transformers every now and then. Like, I got Transformers Prime. I've been into it, So yeah. So I wanna phrase that to not make it sound like I'm not like dumping on like the Transformers. I do like aspects of the Transformers. I don't like all their stuff. But when it's good, it's good. And like Transformers Prime and Beast Wars are probably some of the best Transformers media out there. Like, if you've never been big into Transformers, I would say start there. Don't even go back to the 80s series. Like, if you do go back to the 80s series, you might pick up, like, there's some Easter eggs in Beast Wars, but it's not required. So yeah, I was they kind of did the Maximals dirty in Rise of the Beasts, and to quote Michael Jordan, I took it personally. Those are my boys. Those are those are my Maximals that I grew up with. Let's see. The only from Doc Robotnik, pretty much the only Transformers related thing that I've seen was the movie from the 1980s. Yes. That's been fairly iconic. And the 80s film is probably the most bearable thing to watch, the original Transformers, because I tried to watch the original Transformers, and this was like years ago when it was first coming out on DVD. So this was when I was in high school. I think it was like the early 2000s when it was coming out on DVD. And I was trying to watch it, and I was just like, this is really bad. Like, there's so many animation errors. The story is like incomprehensible at times. The shots are confusing. That's almost kind of like why I kind of like simultaneously like condemned and praised the Michael Bay Transformers films, because like a lot of people like don't like the films because like they're clunky, they're confusingly edited, and you can't tell one robot apart from the other. And having been familiar with the cartoon, I'm just going, yep, that's Transformers. That's the original cartoon. Yeah, but yeah, like the 80s film is what a lot of people are familiar with. Mostly because like it was more readily available. Because I remember like way before I watched the show, I saw the film because it was put out on VHS and DVD before like more complete sets for the TV series were put out. So a lot more people from my generation are familiar with Transformers the movie, the animated one from the 80s. The funny thing about that film is it was considered way more adult for two reasons. One is because there's a lot more death in it. Like, characters are either like there's the somber death of Optimus Prime, but then there are characters who are just killed off screen, or just killed casually. Like, I think like Wheeljack, you never even see him die. They just bring his corpse out. And I think like a few Autobots get just like casually shot by Megatron and they're just dead. But the other reason it's considered more adult is because there's cursing in the film. And by that I don't just mean like, one of the characters says "damn," which they do. There's a moment where like I think it's like Ultra Magnus is trying to like open the Allspark, and he can't open it. He's just like, oh, damn it, open. It's kind of funny. But then there's another scene where the Autobots fail to blow up Unicron, and one of the humans says, oh, it isn't even dented. Oh, shit, what are we going to do now? And here's the thing. So, a little bit of a funny story here. I didn't actually know about the cursing in the Transformers film because I didn't watch it until I was in a video store. So, I was working in a video store where there was a day when like the general manager wasn't coming in, and I was working with a very lenient shift manager. So we could throw on whatever film we wanted during that day. So it was 2003. So no noise. It was 2004. Sorry, old man talking here. So it was 2004. So we threw on to Hellboy since that was the latest film and we hadn't seen it. And like we figured nobody will come in the store. They wouldn't be offended because it was raining out. But then we get a call and we find out the general manager is coming in. So we're like, oh, we're not allowed to put PG-13 films on at this time of day. So we clean up the store and then we take out Hellboy. We go to the kids section. We grab anything. We just like, oh, Transformers. We grab the Transformers. We pluck it off the shelf. We put it in the VCR. And the general manager comes in and we think, okay, phew, it's all fixed. So while the general manager is inspecting the store, the line comes up of, oh shit, what are we going to do now? And like, I kind of like freeze and I look at the general manager for a moment. The general manager is looking at the monitors playing the movie. And he just looks at me and he says, is that Transformers the movie? I'm like, yeah, I think it is. He's like, oh man, that movie's awesome. So it was a great moment where I almost thought I lost my job because of Transformers the movie. Thankfully, the district manager was apparently a fan of that film. And there are parts of the 80s Transformers film that I actually really do I really do like. I will say this. I love the soundtrack for it. You have a soundtrack where you have what was it? Sam Bush. Was it Sam Bush who did like The Touch, which I think was kind of like the big theme song of the film, which is great. That's a great one. But then you also had Weird Al's Dare to Be Stupid in there. So you have Sam Bush and you have Weird Al. And their songs work for the film. It doesn't feel just like, okay, here's like some top talent that we threw in there to make the soundtrack more cool. Like those songs actually do fit. Let's see. From Doc Robotnik, I remember the G.I. Joe movie rewrote Duke's death scene so that he was actually in a coma despite having gaping blood wounds in his chest. Yes, that was another thing I was going to talk about is kind of the bitterness I have about the Transformers film is that it forced them to change Duke's death. So I might not have all my facts straight here, but like here's the story as I've been told. So apparently the G.I. Joe animated film was in production before Transformers started. And apparently, since, these are both Hasbro productions, they were kind of like, they were kept in the loop on everything. And the people who were making Transformers found out that the G.I. Joe people were going to kill off Duke to make room for, more, basically a new line of action figures. And apparently the people who were working on the Transformers animated film saw this and were saying like, oh, that's actually really cool. It's a great dramatic moment. It gives us a chance to do a shifting of the guard. And it feels like more like a movie. We can have death and pathos. That's a cool idea. So Transformers, the movie, ran with that. So they did the same thing that G.I. Joe did. They killed off Optimus Prime and a whole bunch of other characters. And audiences didn't take it well. Like apparently a lot of kids were like sad and crying over the fact that the central hero of Transformers is dead in their movie. And Hasbro, to quote Michael Jordan again, they took it personally. So what ended up happening was that, even though G.I. Joe, the animated movie, was written to have Duke die in the film, they put in the dialogue that that he went into a coma. Like right at the moment of his death where he's stabbed, he tells his brother that he has to change and he has to leave G.I. Joe. And then and his last dying words are, "Yo, Joe." And then he passes out and dies. And then you hear Scarlet say, "Oh, he's gone into a coma." And you can tell this was definitely made after the fact, especially when you get to the finale of the film and they announce like over the radio, "Hey, by the way, we won the day, but also Duke came out of the coma. Yay." And then Duke's brother kind of looks up at the stars and says, "Thanks, brother." And it's like, who's he talking? Duke's not dead. That scene would have rang much better if Duke had actually died in the film. Which you think he did, because like he took a snake bite straight to the heart. That should have killed a man, So yeah, I have that's my biggest beef with Transformers, is that it ruined the G.I. Joe movie a little bit. Mostly just the portion of just like having Duke die off. So we sadly didn't get that in the film. Because yeah, like you could, here's the thing. You could make an edit of that film where you just mute Scarlet's dialogue and then mute the dialogue at the end about Duke being in a coma. And the film would be so much better. In fact, like, here's the thing. Hasbro or Shout Factory, whoever has the rights to the G.I. Joe anime film, if you're listening to this, please make this edit in a film. I usually don't like censoring films, but I feel like having this cut would actually improve the film a lot. So please do it. It would take like no work. You would just have to mute the audio or just like snip those scenes early. That's all you would have to do. It's the most minimal effort you could do to improve this film. And it would improve it so much. Oh my God, it would. That's what I'm saying, Doc. I don't think an edit exists, but if there doesn't, it's not a hard one to make. You just mute the audio. You just mute the dialogue track. That's all you have to do. It would be the easiest cut of the film you would have to make. Just like, I'm telling you, I'm fairly certain Shout Factory still owns this, but if they don't, whoever owns it, all you have to do is label this the Duke Dies cut, and that would sell. I would buy it. I would buy the Duke Dies cut. Because it would, and this isn't just me saying like, oh, I want them to kill off Duke. Like, it would give more emotional weight to the film. I have no doubt there's a fan edit. There's definitely a fan edit. But I just want it more official. Because I want future generations to enjoy the better G.I. Joe film that I never got. Okay. So, let's get to our next film. We spent so much time talking about Hasbro properties. I thought I was going to not say much on that film. But here we are. This film, though, I have a lot to say about. Oh my God. Let me get my notes up here. Because we got a lot to talk about. Ooh. Okay. Whew. Hope my voice can hold that through all this. We'll see. So, in 3, 2, 1. So, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is the sequel to 2018's Into the Spider-Verse, and that's a tough act to follow. Like, as a sequel to what is arguably one of the best Spider-Man films ever made. Like, it's not just a great... I'll go even further. I'll say, like, Into the Spider-Verse is not just a great Spider-Man movie. I'd say it's probably up there as one of the top superhero films of all time. Just because of what they did with the material, how they played with it, how they had fun with it, how it could still be a serious Spider-Man story, and just have eye-popping, groundbreaking animation that you would not see in any other animated film. So, that's a tough act to follow. I mean, like, Into the Spider-Verse won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. That's a huge act to follow. So, I was kind of like, I was excited for Across the Spider-Verse, like the long-awaited sequel. And especially I was looking forward to the fact that a lot of the same staff was involved here. So it's like, okay, it's the same crew and they're probably going to do a good job, but I'm going to like temper my expectations here because I loved Into the Spider-Verse so much. And I really don't want this sequel to falter. Thankfully, oh my God, this sequel soars with flying colors, like above and beyond. Like it's not just better than Into the Spider-Verse, like it's like head over heels better, but like it might be like my top favorite superhero film of all time. Like in terms of like all like the superhero cinema out there, like, you know, like my gold standard way at the top is Christopher Reeve's Superman, but you know, Across the Spider-Verse is like it's right up there. I think after a few rewatches it might be there. So yeah, I love this film so much. For a number of reasons. For one, I love the fact that that they improve more on the concept of, you know, this new Spider-Man and developing as a more interesting character as opposed to just going through the motions. So you have Miles Morales as the new Spider-Man, replacing the Peter Parker who died in his universe, which is established here as Earth 1610. And he's kind of coming into his own on it, you know, after being in contact with the multiverse of other spider people, like, you know, like Spider-Woman and like Peter B. Parker from another universe. He's kind of gotten used to, you know, how to become Spider-Man and is kind of fitting well into that role. He's going through the expected emotions that you have with Spider-Man, which is that, you know, you try to balance your schoolwork with defeating villains, and you can't quite balance both. Like Miles is trying so well here, but he can't quite find that balance. He's having problems at home where, you know, he's kind of fighting with his parents and he can't quite meet up to their expectations, and just can't find that work-life balance to his life that Peter Parker always strived for. While at the same time, still getting in like the quips and still fighting villains and still being frustrated and having all the relatable and familiar problems that we associate with Spider-Man. And the film does a good job getting into that with his character. At the same time, though, like, you know, like, here's the thing. Like, it feels like the film is kind of making Miles like your standard Spider-Man, and then you're kind of thrown for a loop. Because, like, the villain that the film opens with, that Spider-Man fights, is the Spot, voiced by Jason Schwartzman. I should also mention that Shameik Moore also voices Miles Morales, and his delivery is still just as perfect as it was in the last film. I would actually say it's much better just because he's given a lot more emotional weight to work with here, as I'll divulge later. But essentially, Spider-Man is fighting the Spot, who's this new villain who can like create holes and portals, and he's treated as a villain of the week, especially since he's basically knocking off like convenience stores. But then you're surprised to discover that there's actually more to the Spot than this. Like, because you would think like, okay, you have him like ripping off convenience stores, and he's voiced by Jason Schwartzman. You think like, okay, this is just gonna be like a comedic character. He's gonna be there for like some fun Spider-Man antics, and then we'll get to like the real villain, the big one, who's gonna play a bigger role in all this. And like basically like the Rhino in Amazing Spider-Man 2. You think he's just like a starter villain. But it turns out that the Spot plays a much bigger role. Like, for one, he has more of a bigger relation to Miles. Like, they establish him as like one of the scientists who is more or less responsible for making him become Spider-Man. And because of Miles' interference, he ended up becoming the Spot. And because the Spot feels this irrelevancy, he decides to basically, not quite, I don't want to reduce it, because it's essentially the same thing that Wanda Maximoff did in the Multiverse of Madness by traveling to other dimensions to, you know, improve himself. But it's not just about like, attaining something specific. It's about finding relevancy, to not just be seen as just like a goofy villain that nobody takes seriously. So instead, the Spot decides to go to the multiverse, gain more power, and become like basically a god so that he can, control all of time and space and be recognized as more of a threat. But his fight is more or less for a relevancy, which plays well into Spider-Man's role. Which I'll get into a little bit more. But at the moment, I want to talk a little bit about Spider-Woman in this film, Gwen Stacy, who's voiced by Hailee Steinfeld, because Gwen has probably the most complete arc in this film. Like her story in her own universe kind of bookends this film. They establish her as someone who, she has tragedy in her life. She's distant and she feels that she can't connect with her cop father. Especially since, her dad wants to bring in Spider-Man and she's not sure that she can come out to her father and, and be honest with him. And it's one of those things where, she's almost cautious about it because she later comes in contact with this Spider-Man multiverse and learns that, having, tragedy and losses is kind of part of the game. Like they hinted at this aspect in Into the Spider-Verse, like where they specify that, like, look, Miles, if you're going to become Spider-Man, you got to realize there's going to be a lot of tragedy in your life. Like, you're going to lose people. And, for all the fun you're going to have, there's going to be a lot of darkness as well. And what's fascinating about this film, that parallels with both, like, Miles and Gwen and the Spot, is that they're all fighting for what's, like the film even states this directly. They're all trying to fight canon. They're all trying to break the motions and prevent, themselves from just doing what you expect from these characters. The Spot is treated like a villain of the week, and he doesn't want to be a villain of the week. Gwen is treated like someone, who has to keep her identity concealed at all times, and she doesn't want that. Miles is established as quite literally an anomaly who will not be accepted as Spider-Man and has to fight against that because what he's essentially fighting is canon here. And this becomes more apparent once Miles and Gwen come into contact with Miguel O'Hara, the Spider-Man of the Spider-Man 2099 comics, voiced by Oscar Isaacs. Basically, Miguel is the Spider-Man who more or less manages like the whole multiverse of Spider-Man. Like he's made his own kind of universe the hub for where every Spider-Man of every universe congregates, and they all work together and they make sure that they're not doing any damage to any specific timeline, which is a code that they more or less drop to say like they're trying to maintain canon. They're trying to make sure that the tragedies that happen to every single Spider-Man of every single universe occurs on cue and is not interfered with. And Miles becomes one of the most interesting Spider-Men because he looks at this and says, "Nah, that's messed up. I don't think, knowing this information, we have to accept it and that we could try to change it." And of course, Miguel is all like, this is canon, you can't break canon, and Miles is basically, quite literally states, "Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna write my own story, and I'm not gonna be bound by the motions that you have set up for this archetype of the character." So if you haven't already guessed by now, Miguel is obviously a response to toxic fandom. And this isn't just like my headcanon or theory. This has been confirmed by the directors that Miguel is meant to represent people who feel that Miles is not valid because he does not fit the canon of Spider-Man. So Miles' response is just, screw you, basically. And he has some decent backup here. I love how they set up how like the canon is something that Miguel is frustrated about trying to preserve, especially when you have the like at one point they make a visit to the Spider-Man of like an Indian universe. Basically, it's a universe where like Manhattan has kind of transformed into India. I think that it's called like Moombahton, something like that. Yeah, it's like a combination of Mumbai and Manhattan. So you have Patir, who's plays like the Spider-Man of this Indian universe, voiced by Karen Sony, who's so much fun. Like it's a perfect like fit for like and I love how they establish him as like a typical Spider-Man, because he's in this world where he has a conflicted relationship with like the police and a woman that he's infatuated with, and that there is some pathos to his story that reflects past Spider-Man stories. And then once Miles interferes and tries to save the day and make sure that nobody else dies, this kind of breaks that universe. And so Miguel is concerned that Miles is going to make more of this damage, but at the same time Miles has got a question like, well, why do we have to accept this? Why isn't there something more that we can do here? Because like I love how they almost kind of leave it on like a cliffhanger where Spider-Man India's world is kind of left hanging in the balance, because like Miles kind of broke canon and they're trying to repair it, and Miles is kind of questioning like, well, can you repair it? And Miguel's like, I don't know, but it's not looking good. And I love how they establish Miguel too. Like Miguel is clearly like the central villain here. Like the Spot is kind of like the villain who's set up, and then we kind of forget about him because the story becomes a little bit more personal, and they kind of like, save him for like the next film down the line. But Miguel becomes so much more of an interesting character because Miles has to fight against what's essentially someone saying that he can't be Spider-Man. And there's concern for like, because they established that, Miles was bitten by a spider that wasn't supposed to be there, and he wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man, so he's treated as an anomaly. But at the same time, it's an anomaly that it's one of those things where it's like you kind of got to fight against like this idea of this phony idea of utilitarianism about killing one so that billions can live, which is it's a conflicting view, and it's like, and it makes Miguel someone who's a villain who's understandable in what he's trying to do, but at the same time they lean in thick to him being the villain because his ultimate goal is to preserve fandom. Like there's concern there where like you care for him because like he lost his own universe, so you understand where he's coming from, but at the same time you still don't want to see him succeed because you care about Miles. They set him up well as just a teenager just trying to get through life and trying to get used to his powers. There's some adorable moments between him and Gwen where they connect so well, and they have like a fun little outing as spider people across Manhattan where they hang upside down and they just talk about their lives, and it's so beautiful. So in addition to that, you also have like characters who are kind of inspiring to Miles. Like you have Spider-Punk played by Daniel Kaluuya, and he is and he is like, he's very overt about the type of punk he is. He's very anti-fascist, he's anti-capitalist, anti-establishment. He is very much the punk vibe, and Miles just thinks he's cool because, and it makes sense for why you would think that Spider-Punk is cool, because this is more or less who Miles will have to become if he wants to, to live, to fight for his own relevancy as a Spider-Man in this world. So like it's such a great character. So there's there's a lot to digest with this film in terms of what it's saying about fandom and Spider-Man as a whole, but it's just like it has such wonderful characters here, especially the big return of Peter B. Parker, voiced by Jake Johnson here, because they do something with his character that has kind of felt like taboo within the comics, which is that, if you remember from Into the Spider-Verse, Peter B. Parker, he was a mess. he got divorced from Mary Jane. He gained a lot of weight. He didn't have any confidence in himself. He was just at the bottom of the barrel. And then, after teaching Miles how to be Spider-Man, he kind of got a little bit of his groove back, and he felt a little bit more confident about going back into his own universe. And within Across the Spider-Verse, we get to see the fruits of that. We get to catch up with Peter B. Parker when he's patched things up with Mary Jane. They have a very loving relationship. They're married, and they have a kid, an adorable little girl who Peter brings to work with him, even though it seems to be against Mary Jane's wishes. But he seems to be a great dad. He cares about his kid. He cares about his wife. And when he catches up with Miles, he's just a happy guy. That it's just like, it's such like a 180 from like being this hapless Spider-Man whose life crumbled to being a guy who turned his life around. But he's also like the most essential piece of the story, because this is a Spider-Man whose life is together. His life is perfect. He could just forget about the entire Spider-Verse altogether and just live his wonderful life with his wife and daughter, which is great. It's a great life for him. But he doesn't, because he trained Miles, and Miles helped him get his groove back. So when Miguel decides that we got to take Miles off the map, Peter feels that, that this kid helped me. I feel like I owe this kid, and I got to help him. And I love the fact that Peter Parker is established as a mediator. That like he's basically trying to like talk down Miguel from trying to like imprison Miles to preserve the timeline. And it's also Peter trying to talk to Miles to try to like to make him understand where Miguel is coming from, but also try to find a middle ground. Like he's trying to preserve peace. He wants to not have the Spider-Verse be at war with each other, which kind of makes him such a great example of Spider-Man, especially when you consider what he was in Into the Spider-Verse, which is baffling that a lot of people are saying that this Spider-Man is like emasculated just because he shows up to work in a bathrobe. Like some people have called him like a hapless dad, but I'm sorry, like if you look at this film and you think that Peter Parker is hapless, considering he's done something that like the comics tend to shy away from, like anytime the comic tries to like mature Spider-Man and like make him have like a marriage that works and like expand it into a world where Peter Parker can have kids, something that even like Batman and Superman have done at this point, it feels like this is the progression that Spider-Man needs to not only be more interesting but more lovable and enduring and relatable to an older audience. Like I know that Spider-Man has that drive of being like, a relatable younger person, but I mean, like we get that with Miles and Gwen in this film, like amazingly, but to have that older sensation of like getting your life together with Peter B. Parker was such a great payoff from the previous film, but also just like showing a different perspective that like, no, you don't have to accept tragedy. You can make a better world. And Peter sees that he has that and essentially risks it all just to save Miles. So there's a lot to love about this film, because I haven't even talked about the animation. The animation is just, even like the last film was great with how it kind of like animated like a little bit of like somewhere between like 2s and 4s to kind of give like almost like a traditional look to how the characters move, and like the differentiating backgrounds where you have like like the shifting colors and stuff like that. This film gets even more experimental by having different types of Spider-Man that have different like mediums. Like I love how Spider-Punk has this kind of like cutout vibe to him where he's got spikes on his head and he's got a guitar which has like a cutout aura around it that constantly changes color like every few seconds to keep it like vibrant and alive. Then you have different mediums mixed in, like like traditional 2D, like limited 2D, like 3D animation. You have live action with a few fun cameos here and there, which are actually pretty cute and clever. And then also, among all things, you have a Lego universe that's briefly addressed, but not in kind of like a. And I need to stress this: like they bring up all these different variants of Spider-Man and different mediums, but they're never treated as though it's like in the same way as like No Way Home, or it's like okay, here's this Spider-Man you might remember, so we're going to show him, hold for applause, and then just kind of slowly get the story moving again. The story does not slow down here. You get to see a bunch of different Spider-Men, and the film does not slow down at all to explain them. In fact, in order to get the audience caught up a little bit, they actually put in like, the little like yellow boxes they put in comic books to describe like, where you might have seen this character before or how this character functions. Basically give you like supplementary information so that, basically if you're watching this at home, you can pause it if you're not quite sure who the Spider-Man is, and the text will be on the screen there, and then you can just move on to the next scene here. So like when they introduce like other characters like the what are some other ones they have here? Like the Sun Spider, who is wheelchair bound, or what are some? I'm pretty sure they reveal like the Spider-Man from the video games. They reveal the Spider-Man who's a car at one point. I think they reveal the Spider-Man clone from the 90s. You actually get a lot of him in this film. And that's the other thing too. It's like there's a lot of interesting cameos in this film, as well as recognizing different universes. Like in terms of like the different like visions that Miles sees of different like spider people in the universe, and the other timelines that the Spot visits, you get to see everything here. You get to see all the live action Spider-Man universes. You get to see like the Venom universe. You get to see, the video game universe. You get the classic cartoon universe. You also get a few shots of the highly underrated Spectacular Spider-Man series from the late 2000s, which honestly is one of the best Spider-Man cartoons ever made. And I'm so glad that they reference that here, because I mean, they reference everything here. Honestly, I think the only thing that they don't like overtly reference is like the Japanese live action Spider-Man iteration here. Although I have heard some rumors that they're working on it, or that it was going to be in the film. But at any rate, basically the film recognizes all the different Spider-Man universes, which they don't hold for an applause, and it works to the benefit of this story because it's trying to establish Miles having a relevancy to be Spider-Man and to fit into this universe. Not to mention, like, just I love the fact that this film is quite like blunt in what it's trying to say with its characters and what it's trying to establish. Like the whole attacking of fans for saying that Miles Morales isn't really Spider-Man is somewhat overt in how like Miguel stresses it's the canon. You gotta protect the canon, and it's just like he looks like a raving lunatic who's just like he doesn't really care for people. He just cares about maintaining canon, which is just like that. It's like toxic fandom 101. And then you have like a lot of people have been talking about this online, but then there's of course the trans allegory for Gwen Stacy's whole arc. And this is communicated in a lot of ways. I mean, like, for one, the story itself about Gwen struggling to come out to her father about revealing that she actually is Spider-Woman, because, like, she doesn't think that her dad will accept it, since, her dad has been against Spider-Woman this entire time, and then realizing that her daughter might be Spider-Woman might change his perspective on the world, which is a great trans allegory. But just in case that isn't enough, look at the backgrounds of Gwen's world. Gwen's world is so wonderful to look at because the backgrounds all have this painterly quality that reflect the mood and the tone of certain scenes so perfectly. Like, it almost feels like mood wallpaper, because like when you have the somber moments when Gwen is struggling to come out to her father about being Spider-Woman, like you can see like there's dark colors in the background. Like her room has like kind of like the bleeding kind of like the greens and blues, and you can see like if you look closely at the background. I love looking at all the backgrounds here. But like if you look at the background, you can see like a little bit of like paint dribbling down to kind of like establish like the sadness and like, you know, the you know, basically that this world is like alive and like the background is reacting to what the characters are reacting to. But if you pay attention to the color palette, it's very clearly like the transgender flag. And then once once Gwen comes out to her father about being Spider-Woman, the colors in the room immediately change. They become a much brighter hue. That become a much very obvious, you know, they stress like the trans colors all the more. And if you think that that's a stretch or that like that's not enough to prove that this is a transgender allegory, their apartment is literally littered with like trans pins on their jackets and trans flags in their bedrooms. Just in like I love how that's placed there is almost like kind of like a bumper or safety where it's like people saying I don't see it. It's like dude, did you miss this in the room that was right there? It couldn't be more obvious. So there's almost like a little bit of like hand holding by the director to see like look, this is what we're trying to say. Okay, like we're steering you in the direction here. Like this is the type of story we're trying to tell here. So in case the allegory isn't obvious, they hold your hand to it. But yeah, the overall tone of this film is just like, you know, it all comes down to the fact that, you know, you can buy into this adventure with the characters and it works so well on that level, mostly because the tone has a perfect balance between the humor and the seriousness with Spider-Man's role, which Into the Spider-Verse did really well. But I feel like Across the Spider-Verse does it so much better because it's much more weightier. Like when there are funny scenes, they're hilarious. They're perfectly timed. They're ridiculous. They're great visual gags, and it's just like the little bit of like mumblecore that's going on here is really funny. And then when you have to address Miles's problems and being like conflicted about like death and losing people and not being relevant to his own timeline, it hits hard. It feels like a serious Spider-Man film. It doesn't just feel like, you know, I doubt anyone is going to do it at this point, but it doesn't just feel like, okay, here's an animated Spider-Man movie for kids. It's not that. Like, sure, you can take your kids to this, but I doubt that anybody wouldn't be taking their kids to Spider-Man movies if they were live action anyway. So like that being said, this is probably, not even probably, this is one of the best Spider-Man movies ever made. And the fact that this is only the first part of a two-parter, this has to be like described as like the Empire Strikes Back of this Spider-Man trilogy, because it ends on such a wonderful cliffhanger. Like you don't get closure with Miles per se, but you do get closure with Gwen Stacy's route, and then it gets you more excited to get back into Miles' story for relevancy and fighting against the multiverse, and everything that it teases for the next film is just so brilliant. So like I think like that should be made clear going into this film. Like this is the first part of a two-parter, and I feel like it's almost kind of like a little bit of like a bait and switch that they were doing with the film's title, because if you might remember, like last year, the film actually did have the subtitle of being part one. Like it was revealed in the trailer, like, yes, this is going to be the first part of a grand two-part finale. And if you don't know that going in, you're going to be frustrated, because like when I got to the end of the film and it had like the to be continued thing, the to be continued credit, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like there's more of this really cool story and breathtaking animation that's going to be coming, in the next few years. I can't wait. But of course, because, you know, a lot of people were like on the edge of their seat and really excited with this film, there were a few people in my theater who were like, wait, what? That really happened? And I know a lot of people are probably going to hate the film for having that. But I just love it all the more. Like, cause think back to like The Empire Strikes Back or Infinity War, and how great those films were. Even when you got to the ending and you were a little bit offended, it's like, oh, I didn't get the full conclusion. I gotta wait till the next one. And it's like, and and I understand the anger there because you want to see the story finish. But at the same time, the story that's been set up here is great. It's not one of those films where it's like, you just slog through it and then you get to the post credit scene and it's like, oh, okay, I gotta see this film next. And I wonder what'll happen there. No, this film works on its level of just defying canon, establishing Miles, finding a romance between Miles and Gwen that works so well, having eye-popping animation, having fun with the Spider-Man lore, and just making a great balance of seriousness and playfulness within this Marvel Comics character that is just head over heels one of like the best Marvel films ever made. Like, forget this year. Like, sure, I'll write this off right now. Across the Spider-Verse is the best superhero film of this year. That's a given. The bigger question is, like, how this is going to shape up over time. But as it stands right now, as the film that we got, I absolutely love this. So this is easily one of my favorite superhero films of this year. Not just for the animation, not just for the characters, not just for the writing and the voice acting and just the playful meta nature that never slows down and never just stops the film so that it can look at this cameo, and being much more bolder in like the progressive elements that it's trying to push hard. I absolutely love this film. I cannot wait to see this again, and I am on the edge of my seat for what's going to happen in Beyond the Spider-Verse. And I'm going to take this time to like give credit to the creative team here. Directors, Joaquin DeSantos, Kemp Powers, Justin K. Thompson did an amazing job directing. Phil Lord, Chris Miller, and David Callum have composed a fantastic script that respects the comic book lore while also retooling it, that all of their efforts with the writing and directing combined to make probably the closest to like a postmodern Marvel film that we are ever going to get. That being said, we'll have to see what happens with Beyond the Spider-Verse. But as it stands right now, I love the hell out of Across the Spider-Verse. This is must-see superhero cinema. So Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse currently playing in theaters right now. And it's doing rather well, too. Like, I usually don't like to stress box office, but, I mean, considering that Into the Spider-Verse had a box office opening of, like, what, 38 million? I think it was 38 million, something like that. And then to go from that to 120 million for an opening, that's I think it's very close to about in terms of worldwide box office. It's I think it's getting close to 400 million, which which is like beyond like what Into the Spider-Verse did. This is great news. Great news. All right, let's read a few things here from the chat just because I went off there. Let's see. So Noel says, hey Mark, random question. Did you catch the Shin Kamen Rider on Wednesday? Saw someone who looked like you, but I wasn't sure. Unfortunately, I really wanted to go see the Kamen Rider film just because like it's a Hideaki Anno Kamen Rider film. Hideaki Anno, for those who don't know, did Evangelion, and I wanted to see it. It looks great because honestly, it kind of looks like at least from the trailer that I watched, I kind of got the vibe of Shin Godzilla, where it kind of had like a little bit of that Evangelion vibe while also questioning, the very universe that it's respecting at the same time. A little bit of a cross of across the Spider-Verse here. A little bit, not a cross, a segue, if you will, into that. But no, I was not there. I'm sure you probably saw someone who looked at... Actually, no. You know what? You might have seen me there at the theater going to a different film. Because I think, like... let me think. Because, like, it came out in Southdale at that. No, actually, I wouldn't have been at the theater that weekend. that it came out. Unless it was like later in the week, because I don't think I saw any that weekend. So unfortunate, because chances are you will probably run into me if it's at like one of the theaters I go to around the Twin Cities. So let's see. Don Robotic says someone already edited Duke's death scene on YouTube. Oh, yeah. I figured they're probably fan edits of the G.I. Joe film. Doc also says Across the Spider-Verse exceeded even my highest expectations. Yep. I think it's unanimous at this point. This is probably the best superhero film. Like even the people who make it their brand to hate on superhero cinema, like just in general or any time it tries to like push like progressive themes even more like subtly than than Across the Spider-Verse does, they have to admit this is a good film. It's so good. See, I would love to see this do Super Mario Brothers numbers. I think it will. I have no doubt that Across the Spider-Verse is going to do Spider-Man numbers. Because, like, for one, it's the second highest opening of 2023. Like, Mario Brothers is higher, but only by $20 million. That's it. And currently, Super Mario Brothers is like, it's on its way out. Like, it's still within the top 10, but it's dropping quick. And at this point, like, I think, like, Super Mario Brothers, like, globally has about 1 billion, I think. I'm pretty sure it's at, like, 1 billion right now. And Across the Spider-Verse, I think, is very close to 400 million. And I feel like it's going to make $1 billion. It might be close, like, because it's going to have a lot of, like, competition coming into summer. Because it's not just the Transformers. Like, the Transformers film is going to be a bit of a challenge for Spider-Man. But then, like, next week there's going to be The Flash and The Elemental, which is both going to be vying for family bucks. So it's going to be a little bit tricky. I'm not willing to say, like, you know, Across the Spider-Verse is not going to fare well because, like, for one, Elemental is an original film, so you're not going to have that repeat audience coming in immediately. And The Flash, you know, it's a superhero film, but it's a DC superhero film. And DC superhero films have not been doing great at the box office. Like Shazam made about, there hasn't been a DC animated film that a DC film in general that's made $100 million in like the past year. Like the Batman did a great job, but that was the Batman. It was self-contained. It was a Batman film. Everyone was looking forward to it. But then you have, like, you know, DC League of Super Pets. It did okay, but didn't do great at the box office. Black Adam did okay. It's same thing. And then Shazam, Fury of the Gods, same thing. It's, you know. So The Flash, I feel like, is probably going to have a little bit of a struggle. It might get some traction based on the responses. We'll have to see. So yeah, I think it'll come close to doing Super Mario Brothers numbers. Like, it's already the second highest grossing film of the year, so that's a good sign. A Last Shin Kamen Rider was a blast with a fully packed theater. Definitely recommend. I have no doubt. Like, I'll tell you this, Noel. You do not have to sell me on it. I want to see this film. It's a Sentai film that is, I believe I'm saying that right. Yeah, it's a Japanese superhero film, a classic franchise. It's directed by Hideki Anno, who always does very provocative stuff. There's no reason that I would not want to see this film. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of films that just kind of like come and go at the box office, especially with import films that come in, especially anime in general. So yeah, eventually I will get to it because I do want to see it. I'm very excited for it, and this is coming from someone who's not as not as adept on Kamen Rider. Like I've seen like a few episodes. Like I watched the what's it called, like Masked Rider back in the day, a little bit of that, and I watched a little bit of a lot of people recommended to me Kamen Rider Black, which is pretty good. I've watched about like 10 episodes. Yeah, and I've been loving it. I just haven't jumped back on board in a while. So, but hey, it's a Hideaki Anno film, and that's enough for me. That's all I need to hear. I'm in. So, eventually, I'll get around to seeing. Okay, so let's get to our last film, and there's a lot to say about this film. I'm pretty sure the review embargo dropped for this. Yeah, it did. Okay. I want to make sure because this is like the earliest I think Warner Brothers has allowed us to review a film in quite some time. Because usually like Fox and Warner Brothers would do early screenings, so you know. Oh, Noel, you'll be at Convergence. Unfortunately, I won't be at Convergence this year. I won't, unfortunately. I'll miss you all, but hey, you know, I know for a fact Noel will probably be at Convergence, and a whole bunch of other people I love will be at the Convergence Con in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you have not been, it's a blast. It's 4 days of partying with geeks of all colors and fandom and just so many topics, and it's the most fun that you will have at a convention. So unfortunately, I will not be there this year for other reasons, but yeah, definitely for those who have never heard of Convergence, it's the most fun that you will have in the summer if you're a geek in Minnesota. So yeah, I'll miss you too, Noel. I enjoy seeing you there as well. Just there are so many wonderful folks who I love at Convergence, so I'll miss you all. I'll try to make it next year. I'll see if I can. All right. So let's get back to, speaking of geek stuff, let's talk about The Flash. Okay. Oh, I better get hydrated here. All right. And in 3, 2, 1. So, The Flash is the DCEU's Flash movie, which is more or less based on the Flashpoint comics from DC Comics, and it's interesting, I think, that this Flash movie chose to adapt Flashpoint because I think it's a very interesting and playful story, but it's also one that kind of traps the character in cameo land, where it's just basically an excuse to rework a lot of like the heroes and events and be playful with the timeline, which is kind of in line with like, you know, with like stuff that Marvel's been doing with like, you know, Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. But what I find most interesting about this film is, you know, the fact that it's adapting Flashpoint, which was more or less meant to herald a reboot for DC Comics to just change everything for what essentially was the new 52 of the DC Comics. So in the same way that the comics were meant to set up a reboot, it feels the same thing here with The Flash, because we've already heard that like James Gunn is going to be taking over like the DC cinematic universe, and he's going to be running in a new direction. He's going to reboot Superman, his own version of Batman, and he's going to bring in a whole bunch of like different films into the mix with stuff like Supergirl and Swamp Thing and The Authority, and, you know, stuff like Creature Commandos, all sorts of new stuff. So essentially you have a film that is trying to kind of like restore DC Comics as a film franchise, which is, it's equal parts like admirable and frustrating at the same time, if that makes any sense. So I I'm trying to find the best way to. So like I guess I'll go like a little bit of like point by point here. So you have Barry Allen, once again played by Ezra Miller, established as the Flash, and this film takes place after the events of the Justice League, where the Justice League have more or less been formed, and the Flash is working alongside characters like like Batman and the like. And the Flash is he's feeling a little bit devalued. Like, it feels like he's just called in for cleanup. Like, while Batman gets to have the fun chase with stopping the bad guys, the Flash has to go, like, prevent a hospital from blowing up. But also gets a fairly neat sequence where he has to save a bunch of babies from falling out a window, which is equal parts absurd, but also kind of exciting and fascinating for how it sets up the Flash's powers. Like, we get to see the slowing of time that he sees. We get to see how he keeps track of the energy in his body. Which I thought was... It led to a fairly funny sequence where the Flash had to dart between consuming food to keep up his energy while saving everyone from this building that was toppling to the ground. Not toppling, falling to the ground. So it's like the film gets off to a pretty good start. It's like we've established where the Flash is at here. We get to see his powers. We get to see the fun he has with them. We get to see the plight that he's trying to face with himself. And then the film kind of like lays into what we expect from what you might expect from the Flashpoint comics, which is Barry is conflicted about the death of his mother when he was at an early age, and the death was blamed on his dad. And so Barry has committed himself, and they've established this in like the Justice League film as well, that Barry is committed to try to find a way to get his dad out of prison. And it's not been an easy trial that he's tried to go through here to try to convince everyone of his dad's innocence. But then, while Barry is just kind of like zooming around, he discovers that, oh, if I go fast enough, I can travel back in time. And I could probably change the timeline. And so Barry gets the idea. I was like, well, maybe I could change the timeline so that my mom never has to die. And my father never goes to prison. So I could actually grow up with parents and actually have a better life. And yeah, Barry does that, but inadvertently he ends up being flung into a timeline where he has to reconnect with his younger self. So it's weird because like this film, it draws from Flashpoint, but it actually tries to change it and alter it in a way that feels more personal. And on that level, I really do like the things that they change from the Flashpoint comic book. Like, I like that Barry doesn't just come back to the present and discover everything he's changed. Like, he tries to go back to the present, but then accidentally just ends up in a world where he meets his 18-year-old self, and he has a little bit of like a Back to the Future moment where he has to reconnect with the dorkier teenage version of himself and get this version of himself used to his powers. So there's a decent dynamic here between two characters who are essentially both played by Ezra Miller, who are conflicted. So like the older Barry has to convince the younger Barry that about the responsibility of his powers and how to grow up and how to become a better person and basically learn through there. So their dynamic kind of writes itself, and they actually do have some fairly fun, playful moments between them. The problem is that all of Barry's meddling with the timeline has led to some unfortunate events. And chief among those is that Barry no longer has his speed powers, so he can't undo the damage he's done. He's changed the order of events in the timeline, so now General Zod, once again played by Michael Shannon, shows up earlier than expected. Superman is not present, so instead there's a prison break sequence where they have to free the only living good Kryptonian on Earth, which is Supergirl, who's played by Sasha Calle, who does a fairly good job for the few. She has a handful of good scenes that she occupies, and she does a good job, but she kind of more or less feels like a blank slate where you almost wish there were like a handful of more scenes with her. Just it's not that she's bad. she's great. It's just that there's a lot of scenes where it feels like she's trying to make lemonade out of lemon. She's trying to not lemonade, like, trying to bleed from a stone. Make a stone bleed. If I'm trying to make that better, she's doing the best with the few scenes that she's got, and she does a decent job with that. There's also a different Batman this time around. There's a much older Bruce Wayne, who's played by, of course, Michael Keaton, who, of course, when they introduce him, they got to showcase all the old Batman stuff. So this is a different Batman, and by different, I mean it's just the continuation of the Tim Burton Batman. So yeah, Michael Keaton, he's wearing the same Batsuit, he's saying the same lines, he has the same Batmobile, he has somewhat similar the same Batcave, and he also has the same Danny Elfman tune to his to his background music. The interesting thing I think I found out with the Flashpoint comics is how many characters get killed off easily, because the film changes up the story of the comics, because in the Flashpoint comics, like, the world was going to end because of a war between Atlantis and Themyscira. And that's not present in this film. And the war between them also results in these other heroes coming into the mix, like Captain Marvel and Grifter and all these other characters thrown into the mix. And they all don't survive. They all get brutalized. And we get shades of that in this film, but not to the same, like, gut-wrenching degree when when the Flash realizes that, oh, I'm actually doing more harm, and I gotta undo the damage to fix everything here. Like, he does have that moment, but it's a much different moment, mostly because, it, without spoiling anything, it shrinks the box of, like, what the Flashpoint comic was meant to be. And it's frustrating because, like, it feels like this story should be more engaging on a personal level, and in certain scenes it does. Like, you do care what happens to Barry Allen here. You understand his plight. I love the way that they stage, like, us traveling back through time. It's kind of like this spherical treadmill in which he has to kind of, like, step and, like, step forwards or backwards, and, like, the progression of time is seen through these weird, uncanny, like, repeating patterns of the timeline. Visual stuff like that is really cool in the film. But it feels like there's a lacking personal depth to making this story shine brighter. And it's mostly because, like, there's some weird changes to it that I feel are just made to make the film more serviceable, which I've gone back and forth on, because, like, it's good and bad. Like, on one level, like, in the original comics, like, they change up Batman's origins so that it's not Bruce Wayne who becomes Batman, but Thomas Wayne who becomes Batman, because they switch it up so that Bruce Wayne dies and Thomas and Martha Wayne survive. And then, riddled with guilt, Thomas Wayne becomes Batman, and Martha Wayne, who succumbs to her guilt, basically becomes the Joker. Like, it's weird. It's never really expanded upon much, the specifics of how she became the Joker, but it's basically their marriage has fallen apart, which is more or less the thing. And it feels like I kept waiting for that moment. It's like, okay, so Michael Keaton, he's older, and this takes place earlier in the timeline, so obviously this has got to be Thomas Wayne, right? And no, to the best of my knowledge, yeah, it's just Bruce Wayne. It's just like it's a different version of Bruce Wayne, much older, which is weird, because, like, you'd think it'd be much more interesting to have Thomas Wayne there, especially because, like, the whole big, like, epilogue of Flashpoint was, like, was reliant on Barry Allen meeting Thomas Wayne and being able to relay a message from Thomas to Bruce, making the adventure a little bit more meaningful instead of just repairing the timeline. Like, it feels like Barry brought back a little bit of a souvenir that meant something to someone else, and do some good for other people in his life. Like, it's corny, but it worked for the comics. And there are a lot of corny moments in The Flash here that that honestly, like, they're trying. Where like it kind of works, and you're rooting for, like, Barry Allen to save the day and repair his own timeline and come to the realization that he needs to improve stuff. But the problem with this film is that it still feels bound by a lot of the same issues that plague a lot of the DCEU as a whole. Like, a lot of people have brought this up, like the big climax of the film, in which Supergirl, Flash, and Batman have to fight General Zod. It occurs, like, the big battle goes down in this deserted, empty, flat, plain environment. There's no buildings, there's no people around. It's just like, Earth soldiers and Kryptonian soldiers fighting against each other, and it doesn't carry the same weight, especially because this film feels like the climax. I might have to get into spoiler territory here, and I'm not going to try to. I'm going to try to make this as spoiler free as I can, but it feels like the climax, everything that's set up with Barry and the timeline and how this relates to the rest of the DCEU, that the climax should take place in Metropolis when it was getting pounded to the ground in Man of Steel. Because I feel like this is one of the things where I feel like it's a limitation of the DCEU, because they started with Man of Steel, in which they had the big battle in Metropolis, and there was lots of collateral damage, and thousands of people died, and a lot of people criticized the film for that. And since that film, there's been this, like, shifting away to making sure that the heroes battle in, environments that are less, like, detrimental to, like, buildings and people, that it feels like this is the culmination of that, where it's just like, okay, so the Flash is gonna, fight Zod in this deserted, barren environment in which no innocent people can be hurt. But here's the problem with that. Like, if there were any film where you'd want to have, like, lots of collateral damage and thousands of people dying, it would be this fight. Because the whole point of the climax in Flashpoint is Barry witnessing the inhumanity and basically the death of Earth to realize that he has to repair the world. He has to go back and undo the damage that he does. And that more or less happens within this film, but and to its credit, they do a decent job trying to get Barry to realize this amid the battle he's having here. But it just would have worked so much better if you set it in Metropolis, especially since there's an inciting incident that you set up that it makes you feel like, okay, the climax should take place in Metropolis. There's closure there. There's it's more visually stimulating. There's lots of elements that you could expand upon and make the thematic themes, the thematic elements here hit so much harder had this taken place in Metropolis. And it's one of those things where it's like, you look at it and you can't help but feel like this is a general problem of the DCEU. Because if you set the climax, which is supposed to be dark, it's supposed to be futile, it's supposed to be hopeless, but it feels like if you set that climax away from all that carnage, it lessens the impact and it doesn't take advantage of everything that you could build with Barry in that instance. So, like, that's my biggest problem with the film, is that it has so much potential to be a grand finale to the DCEU, and it just doesn't end up being one. Not just because, like, we got, like, a few other, like, DCEU runoff projects before we get to, like, the James Gunn era, which is way more exciting, and I'm looking forward to, like, the reboots of Superman and all that. But it's just like, this film, it's like, it's trying so hard. And it's like, I give it an A for effort. It's really trying to make an exciting Flash film, because, like, they do a great job establishing Flash's powers and, like, answering questions that that might have been lingering in your head, and they explore them in a fun and, exciting superhero way that's kind of cool. The visual effects are, they teeter between being really cool and just kind of mundane, like especially during like the big climax and the daylight deserted field that they're doing battle in. That just, it doesn't really hit that hard. And also the abundance of cameos. Like there's cameos within both like the DCEU and outside the DCEU, and speculation on what could happen with DC Comics films and different comic book iterations and different TV iterations. And I feel like this is like a big problem with this film coming out so close to stuff like Across the Spider-Verse, because Across the Spider-Verse does such a great job kind of like integrating all its cameos and never slowing the film down here. When it has to just like, hey, remember this character? Well, he's here, and this character is here, and this character is here, and well, hang on, we'll get back to the plot, but we gotta slow down, we gotta stop, and have the character turn to the camera and have the music swell so that the fans in the audience can get them clapping for recognizing their DC Comics actors. Like Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse didn't do that, but The Flash did it. Like, there's a lot of scenes that just kind of stop dead in their tracks to remind you that, oh, hey, these characters existed once. It's like, it's playing up to the fans, but in a way that's very fan-specific, that I feel like there are aspects that are going to alienate the audience here. Because, like, at least with, like, Across the Spider-Verse, they did their due diligence to kind of like put like the little like expositional box at the bottom of the screen. So if you're confused, you can read it, and if you're watching it at home, you can pause it and look at it. And The Flash, even though that it slows down so that you can clap at all these cameos, you really have to be tuned into everything here. And even then, you have to just be amused by the mere sight of cameos here. And it gets to a point where it's just like, there's so many cameos and references here that by the time they offer like other big surprises, like, hey, look who we got to appear in this film, it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, but you've been doing that the whole film. It's like at some point the whole surprise value just, it wears off, and that by the time you get to the big climax in which they reveal another surprise actor for this, it's like, okay, yeah, all right, that tracks. I remember that character. So I'm very conflicted about this film, because like on one level it does have aspects of a Flash film that I would like to see. Like I love like the amusing moments, the scenes where like the Future Barry and Past Barry are talking to each other and they have to understand their powers and how they work. There's some okay fight scenes. Like I did like Supergirl's beatdown of Zod and all that, and the big prison escape is pretty cool. But there are so many elements that like this is a film that's like it takes off well and then it stumbles, it falls, and then it gets back up, it tries again, you're rooting for it, and then it stumbles again. It gets up, keeps going, stumbles, and it gets so frustrating because I want this film to succeed because I do like Flashpoint and I would like to see a Flashpoint adaptation, but and especially like this type of adaptation of Flashpoint, because it better personalizes the story and it closes it down enough so it doesn't get lost in like the muck of saying here's this character, here's this character, here's this character. But then it still does that because like then it still showcases all the cameos. We don't get as much time as I'd like with the characters. There are some fun moments and some charisma, but I don't feel we get enough time with like Supergirl and Batman where we care all that much for them. Beyond just like, the fact that we don't want to see them die during the big climax, which is just like, it's a general emotion. Because like, Keaton kind of feels like he's going through the motions, and Sasha Cole is in such a thankless role. I really do hope that she gets like some like Supergirl movie out of this, or that she, because I think like on James Gunn's slate there is a Supergirl movie. I hope she gets tapped for that. I really do, because she deserves better. Because, like, yeah, like, Ezra Miller is fine here. There's a lot of other, like, kind of, like, thankless roles. Like, Ron Livingston as Barry Allen's dad. He does okay for the few scenes he's given. You have Iris West, played by Kiersey Clemons, who kind of bookends the film. Not really given much of anything to do here. Kind of feels like wasted potential here. And I guess that's kind of the best way to describe the film, is that it feels like it has all this potential. It could be something bigger and grander that it's aiming to be. And yet there's this hinderation of like I have no idea whether or not like the big desert climax was shot that way just because like it was more convenient for the filmmaking, it was better for visual effects, or if it was an order from Warner Brothers, but it just comes off as a reflection of the limitations of the DCEU and how much and how far they can go with this material. Because like this is supposed to be a film where they integrate the Justice League, and you don't really see that much of the Justice League. So like between that and the limitations that are set up here, and especially when considering the source material that they're adapting here, it all just comes off like this should be the final chapter on the DCEU, and we can move on to better films after this one. And you know, as being a little bit as like an exit film from that cinematic universe, it's not bad. It's not like, there are moments I genuinely enjoy, but then a lot of like stumbling moments that just like you feel like, God, this could do so much better if it wasn't like bound by like the same logic of the DCEU and just keep shoving cameos onto the screen every few minutes. There's a good film there, and it's just, it doesn't bubble to the surface, mostly because you can feel like the limitations at play here. So like, you know, I'm hopeful that, you know, we can get through this film and then, you know, get through the Aquaman film, which I don't want to spoil anything here, but like the post-credit scene also feels like they just want to shed the DCEU and knowing like the rest of their slate they got to get through. It just comes off that way. I'm not saying that the directors and writers just kind of like, okay, this is like the film we're gonna like use to set up the reboot. I don't think it was like the case there, but the way that it's framed between this point in time and when we eventually get to James Gunn's restructuring of the DCEU, it's just how it reads here. Like, because we still got like we still got like the Blue Beetle film and the Aquaman sequel that are gonna come out eventually, and I don't know. I don't know. It kind of feels like the DCEU should have just ended here, just cut it off here. That being said, when I said that, you know, it reflects like Flashpoint and how Flashpoint was gonna play into the New 52 and how that was a big reboot. The New 52 didn't reboot everything. Like, they still kept the storylines from like Frankenstein and Green Lantern. So it still took the elements that were working that they wanted to highlight here. And that's very much what James Gunn is going to do. James Gunn is going to continue on with like Amanda Waller and Peacemaker and stuff like that, but he's going to shed the stuff that doesn't work, which is honestly like it feels fairly faithful to the comics like that. So I'm, in terms of like the Flash film itself, and it's weird because like it feels like I'm looking at this film more externally, mostly just because the film itself is just like, it's decent, but it's like, it's nothing that I'm gonna watch again. And like it has a lot of positives going for it. Like, it's definitely one of the more comprehensible and firmly grounded DCEU films, especially when compared to stuff like, you know, like the mess of Justice League and Batman v Superman and Wonder Woman 1984 and Black Adam. It's better, but it still has some messy elements, and it doesn't quite become like basically it doesn't become the Flashpoint film that I more or less wanted to see, especially since we already got an animated version of the Flashpoint comics that was very faithful. and was pretty perfect. So if you want to see what you're missing with the Flash movie, I would definitely say check out the Flashpoint Paradox, the Justice League animated film from like 10 years ago. I think that came out. So yeah, I would say check that out for a better film, because the way that this film plays, it just kind of feels like a lukewarm, average blockbuster meant to kind of just, herald in the next iteration of like a DC cinematic universe that will hopefully be better connected and hopefully be much better than what was set up by the Zack Snyderverse, or whatever you want to call it. So it's a fairly mid Flash film that I wish I could love more. I wish I could, because it does have good elements, but it just doesn't quite live up to the potential that I was kind of expecting from this material. So that's The Flash, and it will be in theaters next weekend. So if you're still curious, if you want to see what happens with Barry Allen, you can check it out. But do so with tempered expectations. Because, like, the thing is, I was more fascinated with the film more externally, with what it represents with, like, the DCEU, than the film itself. Because the film itself is, like, it's fine. Like, it has its moments, but it also stumbles a lot here and there. And, like, the climax really makes you question why this took place in Metropolis. Why this didn't take place in Metropolis. Especially since they set it up. Like, it's right there. You set up everything. You have, like, the perfect kind of, like, bookend from Man of Steel to kind of tie this all together. It's like, just, it's right there. But you can feel, like, the meddling going on an executive level and the limitations of the DCEU, where it's just like, this film can't live up to its full potential, So let's read a few comments here. Let's see. Dr. Botnick says, not gonna lie, all these scandals surrounding Ezra Miller and WB going so out of their way to protect them has completely turned me off of the movie. This is my no review. I refuse movie. And yeah, that's very understandable. Like I said, this is a film it's hard not to look at it without the excess baggage, because, like, yeah, it's very hard to ignore what Ezra Miller has done. Like, cause he's like a massive criminal record just from last year. Not even counting like the assault he had in 2020, but just look at what he did in 2022 as general. Like, what did he have? Like, he had misconduct, assault, burglary. He had that weird thing where he was kidnapping. I'm pretty sure he was kidnapping people in a housing project that not a housing, but I'm pretty sure it was a housing development where he had like, I'm trying to remember the specifics. I think it was like he had a bunch of kids there, and there's basically like guns and weed all over the place, which is concerning. So yeah, it's one of those things that you can't ignore, and if you can't ignore all the Ezra Miller stuff like that, I can't blame you, because it's a lot. It's not like he did one thing and you can overlook it. He did a lot of criminal stuff that is very concerning. And in fact, like, the only reason that I'm kind of reviewing the film here on my channel like this, I'll be honest here, is because, like, a few venues have asked for the review. So, like, I figured as long as I'm covering it, I might as well cover it here. Especially with, like, my insight on the Flashpoint comics. So yeah. It's like I said, like, in my review, you could hear it there. I went into the external problems with the DCU in general, so obviously you're not going to be able to ignore, like, the Ezra Miller controversy. So I throw no shade, no blame over people who do not want to see this film, specifically because of Miller's criminal record and what it supports here. And I mean, thankfully, it's not even that great of a film. It's very mid. It's very very like practically forgettable. Like there's a few moments that are okay, that they're fan pleasing moments, but there's nothing here where it's like, oh my god, you have to see this. This changes the DC Comics world. It doesn't. It plays like the most lukewarm version of Flash, where it's just like, okay, this is like the perfect setup to reboot everything, to get rid. I mean, they were gonna do this anyway, and they still screw this up the same way, because if you really wanted this to herald in the James Gunn era, I think they should have showed Aquaman first, like right now, and then like later in August show the Flash. Because that would have been the perfect segue into rebooting the whole DCEU. You know? How's the Snyderverse video coming along? Actually, Doc, here's the thing. I initially just scrapped the Snyderverse video because I shelved it because there's too much crazy crap. But after seeing the Flash film, I think I have like the perfect like setting for how I want to talk about the Snyderverse, because the Flash film makes the perfect argument for why the Snyderverse needs to die. Not so much because it's a bad film, like I said, it's very mid film, but everything that it sets up and everything that it's drawing from and the external information that you take into the film, it's like it's the perfect setup for like why the Snyderverse needs to die. So I think somewhere down the line, I'm going to make a film like that. Once I have like more footage and stuff like that, I'm going to make a film about how the Flash is the perfect representation of like the end of the Snyderverse. So I'll eventually get to that. Let's see what Noel said. I'm not excited for the Flash, but I also generally enjoyed Black Adam and 1984 more than most, so I'll still give it a good shake. But yeah, if they could CG Cavill's lip, they could CG another actor over Ezra Miller's head. Given Rodriguez's 3 weeks and a couple of grand, he'll whip it together in his garage. See, yeah, it's like I'm torn on that because, like, for one, I'm not saying like the technology couldn't do that. I think if you put enough work into that, you could, but at the same time, I don't have like I said, like you looked at like the Justice League thing, what they did with like Henry Cavill's lip, and I don't have enough faith that they could do like a decent face transition there. So, not to mention the other problem too is like, without giving too much away, the Flash relies on a lot of iconography and recognizing timelines. So if something's off here, you're going to know something's off. Because, like, a lot of what the film is presenting relies on your photographic knowledge of DC Comics' previous films to fill in the gaps. So it's like technologically, I don't doubt that they could replace Ezra Miller with his face or reshoot his scenes. But, I mean, like, the film is already expensive enough, so they probably have to rush the VFX. But also, like, narratively, it'd be hard to sell that because so many people have become accustomed to this version of the Flash and other versions of superheroes that they show in the film. So, yeah. It's not a good situation. It's complicated. I guess, like, the Flash is, like, the perfect answer. Like, there's too much baggage. There's too much clutter. We need to start anew. And the Flash is kind of like the herald to that, saying, yes, we need to start up again. So that's the best and worst thing you can say about the Flash, is that it's the perfect excuse to, like, start over. Reboot Superman, reboot Batman, reboot the whole Justice League, and do better. So, you know, that's where I stand on that. So, yeah. And like I said, I do not blame anyone if they don't want to see it because of Ezra Miller's criminal record. That's, to be honest, it was something that was bouncing around in my mind as well, between that. But I've also, you know, I've also covered movies by Armie Hammer, and, like, the confliction I have is, like, whether or not it's that great a film where I'm going to feel bad if I praise it or not. And thankfully, usually with these productions, they're usually not that good. And, like, and I'm not saying that as like a means to excuse Miller's criminal conduct. Like, his criminal conduct cannot be excused. It's just like, it's more of like a case of like whether or not, how much you're able to wrestle your feelings about how the film plays. But thankfully, the film is just mid. Like a lot of like troubled productions, like it just ends up kind of being a mess where you're more impressed that so much of it comes together than doesn't. So, if that makes any sense, All right. Well, we've been going for a while here, so let's wrap things up here. So, we reviewed Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the best superhero animated film this year. Comes very close to being postmodern, and I love the hell out of it. Just a must-see animated film. Not even animated. Must-see film of the year, for sure. We reviewed Transformers Rise of the Beasts, which it does away with a lot of the baggage that comes with the Michael Bay film, a lot of the garbage, but it ends up just becoming an average summer blockbuster where you know it can do more, and it clearly doesn't. And I have similar feelings on The Flash, the new DC live-action film, which tries to make the Flash compelling within a story based on the Flashpoint comics. And despite the decent changes that I like to changing up the story, it unfortunately plays like an excuse that the DCU has to die, and that it's only going to get better once we can shed this timeline and get rid of it. So, very mixed feelings on The Flash. Alright, so that is our stream here. So if you want to check out my reviews, you can head on over to movieswithmark.com, twincitiesgeek.com, or filminquiry.com to read my reviews. My reviews are spread out over those 3 platforms. You can find them there. I also have a Patreon if you want to get early access to my videos, as well as read some of my books. I post there regularly. Every now and then I post about cartoons and films, stuff like that, so you can find it there. And if you like this video, be sure to like it if you want more early movie reviews, and subscribe if you want to hear more about them. I'll try to edit these reviews and have them later in the week. Coming up in 2 weeks, we will be reviewing The Blackening, a new horror film which features a predominantly black cast and will definitely be satirical, to say the least. We'll also review Elemental, Pixar's new original animated film about different elements of water and fire that merge together in a kind of Zootopia environment. And we will also be reviewing Wes Anderson's new comedy, Asteroid City, which merges sci-fi and that usual Anderson weirdness that we've come to expect with his films. So that'll all be coming up within 2 weeks. So, like I said, if you like the stream, enjoy it. Let me know any way you can. Either watching it, liking it, subscribing it, going to our Patreon. Yeah, just visiting the websites where I write all this stuff. So, yeah, I'll be back in 2 weeks, and I'll see y'all then. So, until next time, have a good one. Have a Megaforce good one.